Hello and good morning. My name is Phil Swan. I'm one of the business development managers in the CPD unit at Cardiff University. It's great to have you all joining us this morning. We've still got people arriving, so we're just going to give them a few minutes. I'm just going to run through a bit of housekeeping with you and just introduce you to the Learning at Work Week session we have arranged for you this morning. So Learning at Work Week is an annual national event that aims to spotlight on the importance and benefits of continuing learning and development. The team behind our successful virtual spring and summer schools have organised the sessions today and tomorrow. We still have registrations for tomorrow's session, so please have a look at that. It's on the theme of storytelling in business. We encourage you to look at the backlog of sessions that we ran last year and the year before, covering a wide range of topics delivered by my colleagues here at Cardiff University. To run through some basic housekeeping with you now, the sessions are being recorded, which means they'll be made available via our YouTube channel following the event. If you have any IT issues during the session, sound issues, etc., please feel free to use the chat feature and we'll do our best to try and help you. If your Wi-Fi drops out, please just reuse the link. There'll be someone on the sidelines to readmit you, so you won't interrupt the session or anything like that. Just reuse your link. We're going to do a questions and answer session at the end, so please feel free to pose your questions on the chat feature as we go through, and we'll read some of those out at the end. At the end of the session, you'll see a very short pulse survey with the Zoom session. Please provide us with your feedback. We do carefully look at this feedback and we'll be really interested to see what you have to say. And of course, if you'd like to discuss how your organisation can work with Cardiff University, do drop us an email at the end of the session and we'll be pleased to have a chat with you. So that's all from me. I think everyone's arrived now, so I'll hand you over to our speaker, Professor Sara Pepper. Thanks, Sara.
Thanks very much, Phil. Good morning, everybody. I enjoyed Phil's introduction there, particularly when he mentioned any technical difficulties, as there have been a few this morning. So fingers crossed, well, I'm coming to you loud and clear. Very grateful for you all this morning. What we're going to talk about today is creatives mean business. We're going to talk about why the creative industries and the creative economy matters to all businesses. And in fact, I'd go further than that and say why the creative industries and why the creative economy matter to all of us as citizens of the places in which we live. As Phil kindly introduced, I'm Sara Pepper, Professor Sara Pepper. I work in the Centre for Creative Economy at Cardiff University, based in the School of Journalism, Media and Culture. And I've been very fortunate to work in that team for the past 8 years, where we've done a number of different pieces of work. You can see some of the logos down the right of this slide, projects like Creative Cardiff, Clwstwr, and now Media Cymru. These are innovation and engagement projects to better understand and better enable the creative industries and wider creative economy in our place in Cardiff, in the Cardiff capital region, and for Wales. Now, I picked this picture, this image that you can see, this incredible image of an individual hanging off an orange balloon flying in the sky with a beautiful starry backdrop. And I thought this was a great place to start our talk this morning. I find the architecture of this image absolutely beautiful, the structure of it, somebody jumping out into space with City Hall in the bottom left-hand corner, a very important part of our identity and our architectural infrastructure in Cardiff, the centre, if you like, our civic centre, which this photo was taken during the City of the Unexpected celebrations in 2016, celebrations of centenary of Roald Dahl's birth, Roald Dahl having been born in Cardiff 100 years ago in 2016. And this was a sort of retelling of the backdrop of City Hall being the sweet factory from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and James and the Giant Peach stepping out into the unknown. And I think largely we're still on that journey with understanding the creative and cultural industries. We're stepping out into that unknown. Some things we know, some things we don't. But I think what I capture in this image and what I capture about hopefully what we're going to talk about today is the potential and the excitement for the future. So if we could hop on to the next slide, that would be very helpful.
Sorry, Sarah, just the technical difficulties there. 1 second.
Okay, not to worry, not to worry. Right, I think we'll move on in a second, but in the meantime, the next thing that I want to talk about is this idea of what the creative industries and the cultural industries and the creative economy is. The creative industries, if you like, as a concept, will be sectors, many of which you all know very well. Sectors like film, television, gaming, architecture, music, performing arts, video games, and so on. I mean, I think these are sectors that we're all very familiar with. And it was in 1998 that those sectors became known and understood as the creative industries. It was MP Christopher Smith, in what was a Labour government at the time, who coined those industries as a group, if you like. Now, I think those are sectors that we all interact with, that we're all familiar with, that we engage with on a day-to-day basis in our leisure time and in our retail time, if you like. But I think this notion of the creative economy might be something that is a bit less understood. And actually, it wasn't that far after the coining of the term of the creative industries in 1998 that we really got a handle on this idea of what was called the creative economy. And it was in a book called The Creative Economy, How People Make Money from Ideas, that we really started to get into the nuts and bolts of what this meant. And that book, written by John Hawkins, for me, was one of the most important pieces of early writing about this notion of the creative economy. Hopefully, here we are. There we are. Perfect timing. Thank you, Jessica. Thanks for bearing with that. And thanks everybody on the call for bearing with. Okay, so this book here, it's actually one of my favorite texts. I think it really from an early stage got into the absolute nuts and bolts of where the value is in creative industries, creative and cultural industries, and this notion of a wider creative economy. So you have a list there of all the creative industries, many of which I mentioned a minute ago. The creative economy includes creative jobs in all other sectors. So, for example, creative industries would be somebody working in television production. The creative economy could be somebody doing a creative job, a creative occupation in another part of the economy. So, for example, in Cardiff here, we have Admiral Insurance, a fintech business. Everybody will understand the insurance environment. I'm sure many of us buy our car insurance or home insurance through an organization, a company like Admiral. What's interesting about a company like Admiral, and in fact many other fintech businesses, is they will have creative workers, creative occupations as part of their teams in their businesses. So Admiral Insurance has a large design department, people running, developing software and IT solutions, running communications campaigns and marketing campaigns. Those would all be jobs that we would consider to have to be creative occupations. They will have been trained through courses at university or experience on the job, learning those skills and how to use creative tools and undertake campaigns and activities to deliver, if you like, the creative economy part of the work that then feeds into their business, be it fintech, be it manufacturing, be it whatever, the automotive. And I think we've all become more familiar with understanding that kind of work, as we'll talk a bit later about digital disruption. But what's really important here is to understand that full breadth of what we're talking about in terms of a workforce. Now, neither creativity nor economics are new concepts. What was new in 2001 with this book that John Hawkins wrote was understanding their connections, their coherence, and the value to secure financial capital through the kind of work that I was just describing. Now, creative industries and this notion of the creative economy has received increasing attention due to the rapid growth of all of these sectors and all of this kind of work in the past 2 decades at the very least. I think if we look globally, we're talking about 6 to 7% of activity globally. And actually, post-COVID, there's a lot of focus on these sectors. There was an interesting Deloitte's report recently that was placing quite a lot of focus on these sectors to grow and develop post-COVID in that kind of this phase that we find ourselves in now, as we're trying to understand the world in which we live in again, and how people are engaging with products and services, and how consumers are engaging with all parts of their sort of work life and home life. So in terms of this Deloitte's report, there was a comment in there that suggested that the creative economy would grow another 40% by 2030. So I think what's important here is not just the sort of size and scale, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the moment in terms of jobs and what that looks like, but the fact that this is a global phenomenon. This isn't just happening in Wales, it's not just happening in the UK. And we're looking at quite a considerable growth trajectory over the next period. Okay, that gives you a little bit of a kind of framework for our jumping off point this morning. Fingers crossed we can go to the next slide, hopefully, if the slides are with us. Fantastic. Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate that. Okay, so you've heard a little bit about the sort of context and concept of the creative industries and the creative economy. What does that look like in the UK? The creative industries contribute, as you can see, 84.1 billion to the UK economy. That's about £8.8 million an hour. So they are a considerable part of the UK economy, and as I've already described, are rapidly growing. That number represents around 6 to 7% of the total economy in the UK. It grows faster. It's a sector, it's an area of work that is growing faster than any other part of the UK economy. It employs 2.3 million of us. That's the size and scale of the workforce in the UK. And we'll talk about exports in a minute, because those are considerable too. Now, it's interesting to me, I think, and many others, that when politicians talk about their ambitions for the United Kingdom, or when we talk about ambitions, political ambitions for growth in terms of the economy in Wales, it has been more rare to date. It has been rarer that they would talk about the creative industries. It's quite often that we hear discussions about life sciences, manufacturing, automotive. There's lots of other sectors, aerospace, if you like, that we hear represented in the media regularly and in political debate and discussion. But I think you'll agree the size and scale of what we're talking about. So 1 in 8 businesses in the UK is a creative sector business. So the scale there has grown to a point of some significance, which I think policymakers are now really understanding and starting to invest in and think more seriously about. Now, before we move on to the next slide, just one thought then to explain this in different terms. The creative industries in the United Kingdom are larger than aerospace, manufacturing, life sciences, and oil and gas combined. So the return that the creative economies gives in terms of jobs and return to the UK economy is larger than aerospace, manufacturing, oil and gas, and life sciences combined. I think that's enough of a justification for this sector to be taken really seriously by government and the rest of the workforce in the UK. Okay, on we go. Next slide. Thanks, Jessica. Okay, this just gives you an idea of the scale of the exports. I've just come out this morning of a session. There's a conference in Cardiff today called the Wales Screen Summit that's talking about exports of formats of television globally. And the United Kingdom is still the absolute market leader in that from a global perspective. I think we're just really digging into the data around creative industries exports, and I think it's something that we're going to be focusing on a lot more in the next few years. But I think you can see from both of these data visualizations the size and scale of what we're talking about currently, and then the potential for that to grow in the future. Okay, if we could move on, please, Jessica. Thank you. Okay, so moving down then, we've looked at the global picture, the UK picture, and then moving into what that looks like in Wales. And this map is a bit of a heat map. You can see where there are more circles, there's more activity happening. There's a real hotspot in Southeast Wales. Understandably, that's where a lot of the businesses are focused. But in terms of Wales, in terms of number of businesses, there are 8,600 enterprises, creative industries and creative economy enterprises in Wales. They contribute 5% of GDP to the Welsh economy and employ 84,500 individuals. That's quite a significant number when you think about the size of Wales and its working population. We've had some significant successes in the last few years. You can see the creative sectors listed down on the right-hand side. I mean, in terms of the clustering around Cardiff and the capital region, I'd note particularly high-end television and film as particular successes. But the music industry in Wales is certainly something that has been very strong, and likewise the live performance sector. There are other micro clusters around Wales that are certainly notable, around Swansea, looking up in the north in a couple of different locations. And these are the kind of agglomerations, these are the sort of clusters that we are keen to watch and learn from and see where we can contribute data that will enable the growth of these environments, because we're certainly looking about jobs for the future here. In Cardiff, 15% of the businesses in the city are creative sector businesses. So hopefully all of these stats will give you a very rich picture in terms of the scale of what I'm talking about. Okay, if we could move on, Jessica. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I'd like to do in this next part of the session, before we move at the end to questions, so do hold any questions or pop them in the chat. I know we'll be picking those up at the end, but I would like to share with this Zoom room 5 reasons why the creative economy might be important to you in your lives, to you in your businesses, and to you in the way you think about the future of life in Wales and the UK and in a global picture. So the first of these, why does it matter to you, points is around economic impact. Now, we've just come out of a few slides of quite a lot of data around the economic contribution of the creative and cultural industries. But let's think about this in a slightly different way. Now, 1 in 11 jobs in the UK economy are creative economy jobs, 1 in 11 jobs. Now, that is interesting for a number of reasons, whether you're looking to change the kind of work that you're doing, whether you're running a business, whether you have children who are going to enter the workforce at some point in the not too distant future. It's really worth thinking about where the growth in terms of skills and jobs and opportunities might be. There was a report by Forbes done in 2022, which looked at what skills were the really important skills for anybody entering the workforce. And the top 3 included at number 3, creativity, creative skills. And I think that's really important in terms of where creativity is ranking now. That as a concept, as an understanding, as a set, a range of skills that would be included in that, and why all businesses now need to pay attention to that and think about employing individuals with that sort of capability. And the other point I want to make on here, and why I've listed such a long list of creative jobs, and in fact, that's a very small drop in the ocean for what we're talking about here. I think something I'd like to encourage you to think about quite a lot, whether, you know, like I say, you have children entering the workforce, whether you want to change your role, whether you're thinking about the future evolution of your company and what jobs you might have within it. The creative jobs, or jobs in the creative sector, the creative economy, are very diverse. You can see a list of them here. And actually, those jobs that you see, you know, are have an extremely diverse set of skills and set of opportunities attached to them. So anyone thinking about looking for work in this environment, it's a very diverse a very dynamic and a very interesting part of the workforce, part of the economy to work in. So that's worth thinking about. I think sometimes when we think about things like, we can talk about sectors like fashion or film production, television production, but actually when you drill down into the different roles that you need to do that, it lists a very rich picture for opportunities for future jobs and skills. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now I mentioned this already in passing, digital disruption. I think it's something that we're all aware of on a day-to-day basis. I've certainly had 24 hours of digital disruption with a few technical hiccups here and there for various reasons. It's something now that is a normal part of our day-to-day lives, whether we're using our handheld devices, phones, iPads, computers, engaging in this kind of thing, online shopping and so on. Digital disruption has been rife in the past decade and will continue to be so. I think the only thing we can guarantee is the speed at which digital disruption is happening is just increasing. I think we've heard a lot in the news in the past couple of weeks about artificial intelligence. I think last year, all the chat was about NFTs and cryptocurrencies, perhaps last year and a bit the year before. I think, this exciting time that we're living in, when the digital environment is so rich for disruption and innovation, is only going to have an impact further on the way that we're living our lives. Now, from a creative sector perspective, that's offered a lot of opportunities. If you think of streaming video on demand platforms, and I've included in the slide here a couple of examples of those, Netflix and Hulu. Netflix only came into being in 1997. So it's not all that long ago. Certainly, over half of my lifetime, streaming video on demand platforms just didn't exist. And I think we're seeing the rise and growth of those continuing as those large corporations, technology and media corporations are evolving, as user need evolve and as digital technologies enable them to do so. Now, it offers a real opportunity for change and dynamism in the creative industries, as radio, television, video games, and so on have done in the 20th and 21st century. I think we're only going to be set to see more of this. So I think this is something to be really mindful of, for us all to be aware of, as AI and robotics, cyber are being used to produce and create content in the creative and cultural industries that is then being employed in a range of other businesses. It's important for us to think about how we're utilizing these technologies, whether we know enough about them or not, and what they could potentially do to transform the future of storytelling and content production in a way that we're engaging with them as users, as audiences, and as tools, if you like, that will enable our businesses. So I think certainly something for us all to be very mindful of. I would ask a question of you all right now. Do you know enough about these technologies? Do you know who's making them? Do you know in your supply chain or in your community who you could engage with to find out more about them and what the potential is for you to further your business ambitions or your own personal aims and ambitions? So I would suggest at this moment, and we'll talk about this a bit further down the line, thinking about who is operating in your local community, who the local suppliers of skills and capabilities around these digital technologies. Okay, next slide, please, Jessica. So the third reason I would suggest that the creative economy is so important for us all is around content. I've talked about content quite a lot already this morning. Now, Bill Gates was famed for saying in 1996 about content is king. And that was a comment that he made in terms of the internet and what the capability and potential for the internet was, but also what you needed to do with the internet in order to enable it. Now, I would say that Bill Gates' comment was so relevant then, and even more so now. Content is still king. Content is the thing that is driving all sectors in terms of how they're engaging with users, with audiences, with their own communities, in terms of them being relevant, in terms of them selling what they're doing, and it just can't be ignored. The second picture on this slide I thought was quite amusing, this notion of, if I don't put out 100 pieces of content every second, I will be instantly forgotten. Now, you know, looking back to the digital disruption slide, but thinking also about this notion of content production, equally, we're in a very fast moving environment around social media and a variety of different communications. And there has become, you know, a much sped up need for sharing content at the right moment in the right way. Now, all of this is true. All of this is true. Content is king, and you know, putting out content at the right time, at the right moment, provides opportunities and is important. But again, connecting back to my point before, who's making the content? Well, it will be individuals working largely in the creative industries and wider creative economy. Communications professionals, social media professionals, marketing professionals, and then everything else from video production, music content laid over videos, translation services, etc., etc. It's a very rich environment and supply chain with a lot of skills that are required to put together the kind of content that will be really effective in driving your businesses forward. So my recommendation here in terms of why the creative economy is important, think about the potential of content, how you're using it, where you're distributing it, what you're getting in return from it. But then most importantly as well, who's making it for you? Who could make it for you in order for you to really achieve your aims and ambitions? Now, what's quite important here, of course, is a global marketplace. It's a global marketplace for everything now. But I think it's really important to think about your local creative community as much as, you know, agencies and individuals further afield. There are a lot of people working in the creative and cultural industries who work freelance, who work self-employed, copywriters, different content producers of a range of different kinds. So if you are engaging services, or if you're thinking about engaging creative industries, creative skills, content services, think about that local environment and how you might be able to engage a bit more widely. If you are producing content, have a step back from it, assess it, think about what it could be doing more for you or differently for you. If you're not making any content, think, could you? And if you were going to, what will you hope it would achieve? But at the very least, think about your content environment and analyze it a bit in the context of these thoughts. Okay, Jessica, on to the next slide, please. Now, another really important consideration, I think, in terms of the wider creative and cultural industries is about identity and placemaking. Now, I imagine there'll be a number of people who have joined today who are perhaps based in Wales, perhaps around Cardiff and the city region. Now, what we've seen, and there are a number of significant case studies, is the additionality, the value and the impact that the creative and cultural industries in a range of different sectors have on places. I've used Glastonbury there as an example. Equally, I've just come back from Los Angeles and a trip to meet a number of different large multimedia corporations in Hollywood. You know, those are places that have become synonymous with the sectors and the activity that's happening therein. The West End in London would be another. But this is in a world where we're all very conscious of place and place making and identity. I think these have become important opportunities for places. Now, I'm have had some interaction with Game of Thrones or going to be surrounding area. This is a really interesting case study in terms of the population of the series and the additional impacts that it had whilst it was there, because there is a story about the economic impact of the filming itself and the cast and the crew and the supply chains and the catering and all the different additionality that would have been required to make the show there. You know, when you're talking about production of this size and scale, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people on set on a regular basis. So there's an economic impact. But the one I want to raise here is around tourism that was connected with this TV series. Now, this was commissioned by HBO, so it's a US commissioned series, shot in, as I said, in Northern Ireland, but had such a significant impact. It's now been termed the Game of Thrones effect in terms of the additionality to tourism. Now, I think in terms of tourism, that's it. There's about 1.8 million people living in the region directly around where this was being filmed. I think tourists at the time when the series was in its height were numbering over 2 million a year. So there were more tourists coming to look at what was happening around Game of Thrones filming than there were actually people living in the region. That offers a significant secondary opportunity for places in and around a different sector. I think the image on the right at the top is in New Zealand, and for those who remember the Lord of the Rings trilogy, there's some great case studies if anybody would like to look up a bit more around the impact that that had on New Zealand and has ever since in terms of offering landscapes, but also a good place to go and film. And this is something that's in discussion all the time in the sector around where these large productions are being located and the value add that they have to the places where that happens. Wales has certainly been a beneficiary of that. One final comment here is around other brands. You can look at Lego, Apple, or the kind of significant fashion houses in Northern Italy to understand the potential impacts and benefits that have been gained by significant creative industries, brands that are located there. Okay, next slide, please, Jessica. Okay, now a final comment to make before we move into questions, and certainly something I think that everybody should perhaps consider a bit when they're thinking about the value of the creative economy and the creative industries and cultural industries is around our health and well-being and our sense of community. Now, I think, you know, everybody will have been aware, if we look at that picture in the bottom right-hand corner of that young boy painting a rainbow in their window, when COVID hit and we were all locked in our houses, it was a very interesting process that many of us were mapping around what individuals were doing with their time, whether it was with the rainbows, representing a sense of solidarity and community whilst we were away from others. There was also an opportunity that we saw many uptake around engaging with creative and cultural product. Netflix subscriptions went through the roof, Disney Plus subscriptions also, but it wasn't just television consumption. You couldn't get a cross-stitch set on Etsy or the internet anywhere because of the popularity of individuals engaging with creative activity to try and fill some of their time, but also I would suggest, you know, understand a bit about what makes us what is it about our culture and identity and creativity that makes us feel something as individuals. There's an interesting report for anybody who would like to read more called Boundless Creativity, which looks into some of this and thinking about what culture is like during something like a pandemic, what it does in terms of offer us solidarity, community, and opportunity in a time of being apart from others and in a time of varying needs that we hadn't experienced before. The picture in the top right-hand corner I just want to mention before we move on is an activity that happens in and around COVID. It happened before COVID. It's an organisation still going, and it's the Phenomenal Forget Me Not Choir. which is a choir that works with individuals with dementia and their families. And it's quite an extraordinary opportunity to come together for individuals and family members to really think about their health and well-being during having dementia, and for families thinking about what it's like to be in a community and care for individuals in that moment. And the Forget Me Not Choir is one example of hundreds and thousands of creative and cultural activities that happen up and down the UK that mean to me that the creative and cultural industries are just so important about enabling us to all understand about what it is to be human and to live our lives in a very rich way. Okay, if we move on to the final slide. Thanks, Jessica. So I hope that gives you a small window, a quick window into this notion of the creative economy and the creative industries, what we mean by those sectors, those industries, those activities, and how they can impact not just our work lives. They are very important, I hope you will agree, for the future of the economy in the UK and indeed globally, and however that will manifest in the years to come. But they're very important to us as individuals living our day-to-day lives also. So I hope that you go away with a little bit more of an understanding and a keenness to find out more about how they might be able to impact the future of your work lives and your personal lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really interesting. Thank you. We've had a couple of questions come in, but of course we're keen to receive some more. So if anyone's got any questions, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, or you can use the chat feature as well. So the first question we've got come in is the 84.1 billion pound economic contribution is amazing. Have there been any assessments of the soft power benefits of the creative industries around the world with it having a global audience? I think you've frozen.
Sorry, Phil.
Slightly.
I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't. Yeah. I didn't know if I'd frozen or if you'd frozen, but I think if I'm right in saying, I think I heard the end of the question about have there been any assessments of the soft power benefits of the creative and cultural industry? Is that correct?
Yeah. You got it, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, there have been a number of different reports. Actually, the British Council, I remember, did a very interesting one. It was probably about a year before we all went into lockdown. And naturally, I think you can appreciate from a number of the things that I covered today, which I didn't just want to cover things that were just about economic impacts and, that kind of, that picture. But yeah, I mean, the impact of the sector is significant from a soft power perspective. And I think if you look at the way that the British Council is structured, there's been a creative economy department there over a number of years, and they have in their offices around the world, they have individuals that run projects around arts and culture and creative industries and the wider creative economy piece. So they're certainly an organisation that firmly understand the benefits of the soft power, of which there are many, and undertake activities to really think about utilising that. I mean, I think it's interesting in the work that we do to see how that's evolving. I mean, a lot of my work is about engaging with policymakers. That's not just talking about policy around the creative and cultural industries, it's seeing how other bits of policy connect to it. So without wanting to sound too tangential, I'm often in discussions around education. As many people on the call be aware, we had a new curriculum in Wales in 2022. Now, out of the 6 pillars in that new curriculum that all our children in Wales from age 3 up will engage with, the expressive arts, as it's termed, is one of those. So the connection for the creative and cultural industries into other parts of the policy environment, including education, but not limited to, thinking about sustainability, thinking about transport, for example, it is a very important part of that work. So I'd say, whether you want to call that soft power, whether you want to call that connectivity, or just clever joining up or logical joining up, I think there's certainly a lot that the sector does in that space.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sarah. I had another question come through. How do you think the Cardiff Place brand is perceived as a centre for creative industries across the UK or worldwide?
That's a brilliant question. And I think it's one that we've been grappling with over the past 8 years. I have some great slides that I didn't include in this, but I'm just minded of now. When I first took on this role 8 years ago, I did a Google search for creative and Cardiff, just to see what the internet would give back to me in terms of what did that look like at that moment. And unfortunately, there was a photographer, a Polish photographer, who'd been doing some work in Cardiff at the time. And there were some photos that people may have seen that were published. They still reappear every so often. They were taken on St. Mary Street. Now, if anyone's been out of an evening on St. Mary Street, I'm sure you could perhaps recreate some of those images in our minds. There was a lot of people out in party outfits, perhaps, thoroughly enjoying themselves and showing one very particular side of the city at a very particular moment. I'm not sure they were particularly rich in terms of illustrating the true creative and cultural picture of the city. So I think places have to be very careful of the kind of imagery, the story that's being told about the place, and making that visible to others. I think what we've done over the past 8 years through the Creative Cardiff Network is try to tell our stories. So I said this morning that we've got a really exciting music scene in Cardiff. High-end television and film is also, blossoming. We've got real strengths in heritage and so on. How do we tell that story? And there's another question that links to that. Whose job is that? I mean, we are taking it on in our work. We run the Creative Cardiff Network, but it's an important job to do to join up across places, from policymakers to the education environment, industry themselves, and so on. Undoubtedly, though, I think we are in the great place race at the moment. It's all about how we tell these stories and how we try and create an identity. I think the story of Cardiff's creativity has really evolved in the past 8 years. I think we've got much better at joining together and creating a really clear narrative. I think there are also, other things that have helped in terms of understanding the wider picture across the UK, stepping back and thinking about how we might want to engage in that. There have been a number of different UK government schemes over the past 8 years, some of which we've been very successful for bidding into, which means, again, that Cardiff's reputation for a city and for a city region that invests in and takes very seriously its creative and cultural industries is growing. I think that's important. Just coming this morning from the Wales Screen Summit, hosting large-scale events, UK-wide events, or even international events, is also another really important part of telling that story, not just to ourselves, but to a global audience. And I think we're on a trajectory. I think we've made progress, but my honest opinion is that I think we've got a lot more to do. We have an incredible creative sector here. We have a lot to shout about, not just about what exists now, but what the future holds. So I'm hopeful that we have the right groups of people joining together to do that as we go forward.
That's great, thank you. And last question, unless we have any more come in the meantime, but it is they would like to learn a little bit more about the supply chain opportunities for SMEs to support the creative sector, especially when you get these pop-up towns for location production. Could there be more done to promote these opportunities to SMEs based in Wales?
Yes, I mean, so 2 points there. One, the environment is very rich for SMEs. And, I was talking about, those on this call being aware of the creative and cultural industries and how they can engage with their businesses. But of course, the person who asked this question is absolutely right. SMEs can engage, very much into those supply chains. Now, when you make, let's say, high-end television, you're right, those pop-up locations come up in a variety of different places, but also when it's studio-based. When you're doing that kind of work, you need such a broad range of skills and different suppliers, whether it's scaffolding or catering or painting and decorating, hairdressing. The supply chain is long and not necessarily what you'd immediately think was required on set and on site. So the point I'm trying to make there is you're absolutely correct. The opportunities are there. In terms of sharing more of those, I'm aware that there are a number of different organisations in the ecosystem here, from Creative Wales, which is a Welsh Government organisation, to Screen Alliance Wales, to Film Cymru Wales, who will be communicating about opportunities for this. If the person who made this question wants to get in touch, I'll certainly signpost you to those organisations or anyone else that might be able to help. But, not in the least contacting, large production bases, whether it's independent companies or studio facilities, would be certainly a good way to do that. And there are some phenomenal businesses that have grown as a result of becoming allied in some way, connecting in that supply chain to creative and cultural industries businesses. So, I went out to Dragon Studios, sort of in Bridgend direction a couple of weeks ago. And actually that was set up by individuals who ran a scaffolding business. And now they find themselves with, 6 or 7 sound stages and quite a significant footprint there. Likewise, Forward Construction, who are located close to Bad Wolf Studios, have really found a market as the high-end television and film environment has grown for working, building sets and other facilities and infrastructure that's required during that. So I'd say if it's something you're interested in, there's definitely ways to plug into it. Please do get in touch afterwards if I can help or follow up any of those links I just suggested.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sarah. I think that's all the questions for now. So I think it's probably time to wrap up the session for this morning. So just as I close the session, just to remind you all to please take a look at the backlog of sessions available on our YouTube channel. Also, if you would like to book onto the session tomorrow looking at storytelling in business, then please do. And lastly, to say a massive thank you to Professor Sara Pepper for her fantastic presentation this morning. So thank you very much, Sarah.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.